Hey everyone, it's me again. For this video, I'm just going to quickly show a couple of things that I forgot to mention in the previous one. Mainly that would be the mass properties of our parts, as of course this is very important for the actual project. Additionally, I was going to go and show you a couple of the shortcuts and usage things about Patran that I tried showing in my previous video, but they weren't very visible due to the fact that I had very low frame rate. So this time, as you notice, I increased my frame rate, so it should look a little better on your screen when watching it. Additionally, I'll try to keep this video under 20 minutes in case someone wants to watch this quickly and get some of the key points about Patran without having to watch the full 2-hour version that I had from before. Okay, so let's just get started with the same model as I had last time, if I could find it. Okay, let's see, I believe it was this one. Ah yes, exactly right. So last time I created this part, then we make this solid, and we see that we had a number of fillets and some chamfers combined with fillets here, as well as a hole in the part, and we applied several different forces to it. Okay, so that's that. We also meshed it and did the simulation, but we never did the mass properties. So in order to find out what the mass of this object is, we first need to go into the properties, go into our isentropic properties that we I'm sorry, not isentropic, isotropic properties that we defined before. And here we have the material that we defined. I believe we can just double click it and it opens up. And notice that in here I put in the elastic modulus and the Poisson's ratio, and with the expectation of actually doing the mass properties in the previous videos, I also put in the density, but unfortunately I forgot to do that. So if you don't have a density, put that in now so that we'll be able to actually find what the mass of the object is. But additionally, if you don't know what the density is and you simply want to test your part, and you know that the the density of the part will never change and it'll always stay the same, one of the things you could do is, instead of getting the actual mass of the part, you can get the volume of the part. And so the ratio of the volumes from before and after would be equivalent to the ratio of the masses from before and after, because the densities haven't changed. So if you don't know the density of your particular object, you don't necessarily need to do the mass properties, you could do the volume properties. So I'll show you both, because they're on the same screen pretty much. Okay, so alright, I'll hit OK, I'll hit apply, and okay, the way you get the mass properties is rather simple. You go to Tools, and under Tools you have this mass properties. Now unfortunately there's one caveat to it. It opens up in this sort of window, and if you hit apply, it comes up with an error message saying no region is defined. And while I'm sure there's probably some correct way to do it, my friends and I have been able to get it to work by simply hitting define region, and in here changing the region to be all, and then changing FEM to be geometry. I'm not exactly sure what these things mean, but they seem to work. So we now hit OK, and if we hit apply, we notice it comes up with this table. Conveniently enough, right here we have our mass and the volume as well. So by analyzing these different parts, we can get different masses or different volumes. Now this is really cool, but we only see this because we defined the density for our object. If we didn't know what our density was, these values wouldn't work for us. Now the question is, how do I get this window to come up if I didn't define the densities? Luckily, there's this special thing right here. It's the density slash concentrated mass thing, and if you drop down the arrow, you see there are two options. There is use element properties and use this 1/0 thing. Using element properties will actually give you the mass of the object based on the density that you entered. But if you don't know what the density is, you could change it to this 1/0 thing, which will automatically use the number 1 for your densities. So now I changed this, and now let's hit apply, and you notice that the mass is exactly the same as the volume, because it assumes that the density is 1. Okay, so that makes it really easy and convenient to calculate the ratios of the masses by simply taking the ratios of the volumes, because you assume that the densities will be the same in both the parts and they'll just fall out of the equation. Okay, so that was that. Okay, now I'm going to take a few minutes and show you a couple things with Patran that I did show in the previous video, but they were a little difficult to see because of my low frame rate. One of those things being this viewport is kind of floating around, and it's kind of uncomfortable the way it is floating around. So I just wanted to point out that if you double click it, it auto-fills however much screen room you have. So if I give myself a lot of screen room, it will auto-fill to however much space I have. Another thing you probably noticed while I was doing this demonstration is that I was very easily rotating my part. The way I do this is by holding down the middle mouse button, otherwise known as a scroll wheel, and simply dragging my mouse along the table. This will allow me to rotate the part in any direction I want. Additionally, if you hold down the Shift key while pressing the middle mouse button and moving your mouse, you can pan your object around the screen. Now, right now it doesn't look that useful, but once I show you the zoom, you'll see how it can get pretty cool. So if instead of holding Shift, we now hold Control, again the middle mouse button, and roll the mouse, you see we can very smoothly and easily zoom into the object. Now, it zooms into the center, so this is where the pan comes in handy. If we hold down the Shift, we can now pan down to wherever we want to look at, rotate our object a little bit, pan some more, and zoom in. So this becomes a very convenient way of working in Patran. And if you're familiar with SolidWorks, these are almost exactly the same commands as in SolidWorks, except just flipped. In SolidWorks, the Shift does zoom and the Control does pan. So it's very similar, just have to flip your orientation a bit. Okay. Alright, so what else is useful? You probably noticed that my background is these two different color gradients than what you have. Typically it's blue and light blue, which are quite inconvenient because the model is the same color. So the easy way to change that is to go to Preferences, Graphics, and right here on the side you notice there is default background color. You could either change that by hitting one of these buttons and then hitting Apply, which just defaults it to, which just completely sets it to one color. Or, let me open up that window again under Preferences, Graphics. Or, what I prefer is Background Effects. This lets you choose color gradients out of different colors. So, for example, we can choose yellow and orange, and then we can select one of these directions. Like, for example, it's set to center right now. Oh, well, I can't see that very well. These two colors are very similar. How about we try horizontal? We can barely see that. Alright, you know what? Orange and blue it is. Here we go. There, you see that's very nice now. So you could play around with this and have some really nice color effects. Those will also help your drawings look pretty unique and awesome and stuff. Yeah. Alright, so that's that. Let me just set this to something a bit easier on the eyes. Let's go for like this. I think this will be interesting. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. And decisions. Okay, let's go for yellow. I haven't used this combination yet. Yeah, this looks pretty cool. Alright, so I want to make it kind of like a sunrise, so I'll flip these two colors around using the swap colors. And yeah, it's cool. Okay, I hit apply. Perfect. Alright, so now we got this part. And alright, what else do we want to cover? Okay, the other thing I wanted to cover was these shortcut buttons right here. Notice I have a lot more shortcut buttons than you do, and you can add these buttons originally came from this home menu. And the way you add shortcut buttons to this quick access bar is by simply selecting any button you want in your in this thing right here, right-clicking it, and then do add to quick access bar. So now they'll be here, and no matter what mode you're in, you'll still be able to use these buttons. So these are very convenient. If I could offer you some recommendations, the ones you'd probably find most useful are the wireframe, smooth shaded, of course the isometric views and the side views. So I have this side view, front view, and top view. I just added this button, but I don't think I really need it, so I'm going to remove it by right-clicking. And of course, the default buttons that are useful are the graphics refresh and the fit to screen. Alright, okay, what else? Alright, another useful thing is, in class we use these buttons, in all of our tabs we use these buttons to do whatever we want done. But what I want to show you is that it's much more convenient to use this menu right here. As soon as I open up a tab, the relevant menu for that particular tab appears. Okay, so let me just show you in geometry. So I have this part, and let's suppose I didn't like it and I don't want to get rid of it. So easy thing to do, you pick an action, you want to get rid of it, so you open up the actions. Oh, here, there's a delete action. Perfect. And now the object that you want to delete, I want to delete a solid because this part is a big solid that we made last time. So now I'm just going to type in solid 1, or of course you could select it by going like this or simply clicking it. Either one would do. Oh, I also recommend having auto execute turned off. On yours it's probably turned on. On mine I already turned it off last time. Okay, so hit apply, and now this thing is deleted. Now when you're looking at it, it looks like it's still there, but notice these black lines. Whenever something turns black, it means it's deleted. So as soon as we move the screen around or refresh our graphics, it's going to disappear. Oh, it didn't disappear? I'm sorry, because I made one silly mistake. Notice that all my forces and stuff like that disappeared, but we're still seeing what looks like an object. This is in fact not our object, and it's great that this happened because I can explain this to you now. This is simply the mesh of the object. It's not the object itself. I never deleted the mesh, so now the object is gone, but its mesh still remains. This is typically pretty bad, and although I think it might be possible to get rid of this mesh, I would honestly recommend undoing it using the undo button right here, because otherwise it's pretty difficult to remove that mesh, as far as I'm aware. So first, before we delete this object then, we're going to go to meshing, and then again using these buttons up here, we're going to select our action as delete, which is down here at the bottom. Then we're going to select mesh, and now if you want to, you could try to do the surface, but it really depends on how you made your mesh. So I'm just going to let you know that in the previous video we made this mesh using a solid, so trying to delete the surfaces won't do anything. So what we're going to have to do is switch this surface to a solid. And this is just some general information that you'll just have to have from prior knowledge. In our case, I know it was a solid because that's the way I made it. Alright, so I'm going to delete it. Alright, you see the mesh turned black, which means it's gone now, so as soon as I rotate it, now it's not there anymore. Perfect. Okay, so now we can go back to geometry, and we're going to again delete solid and solid 1. Boom, now everything is black. I rotate it and it's gone. Perfect. So that's exactly what I wanted, and now I'm going to be able to show you the next thing, the next real quick thing that I wanted to show. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a quick object, and I want to create a solid right away without creating any surfaces or anything like that. So I'm going to go to a solid, and we could use one of these primitives, but I prefer to define my own solid. So I'm going to use this XYZ tool. Now of course there are other tools that you could play around with, like vertex. This allows you to define all of the vertexes, so you could have some sort of fancy shaped object. Unfortunately, it only lets you do 8 vertices, so it's always going to be some form of parallelogram, quadrilateral, kind of whatever thing. But this gives you a little more freedom. The thing that we're going to do now, though, is the XYZ. This will allow us to create a general rectangular shaped object that we could then work with. Okay, so the most important things here are the coordinate list, the vector coordinates, and the solid ID. Solid ID gives you the name of the object, so this will be solid 1. If you change it to 12, it'll be solid 12. This thing tells you the origin of the object, so that's where the bottom left corner, well, not necessarily the bottom left, that's going to be the corner that it starts from. You'll see what I mean in a moment. And this will be the directions in which the object is created. So this means it's going to, from the origin, which you define here, the object is going to move 1 unit in the x direction, 1 unit in the y direction, and 1 unit in the z direction. Okay, so that's fine, but I'm just going to tweak this slightly so we could actually see something special, so it's not like just this one symmetric cube. Okay, so I defined some values here, and I don't know, just for kicks I'm going to offset it just slightly. It's not going to make any difference, but you notice this is the global origin, and we'll see that because I offset this by a little displacement into y, it's not going to start exactly from the global origin. Okay, we hit apply, and there's our solid. And notice if I rotate it to the side, it's 1 unit away from the global origin. And when I did that, my forces appeared again because I never deleted them from before. So the forces, the Patran knows that I applied the forces on solid number 1 and on a particular face of that solid. And so when I created this solid right here, due to the fact that it was called number 1 in this solid ID list, when I created it, Patran says, hey, it's solid number 1, and it's got this face that used to exist on the original solid, so it must mean that you want your forces to be applied there. Which is fine, sure, why not? But I'll delete them later, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so I'm getting carried away again. Let me just speed up the process a little bit. The next thing I wanted to show you was how to do a Boolean operation and subtract mass from your object, because that will be useful. So in order to do that, we're going to create a second solid. Let's just position this one a little higher. Let's move this to 4. Let's move it over 1 inch in the x. I'm sorry, I don't want to move it 1 inch in the x. I want to move it 1 inch in the z. Yes, because my z side is longer. Let's move it 1 inch in the z. And I don't want it to be quite so tall. I'm going to make this 5. And going to be 2. And I'm going to make the x a little larger than the thickness of the object, so I could be sure that it's going to penetrate it completely. So now you see this object, it goes all the way through. I'm actually going to make this -1, so that it's definitely all the way through. And the y length, I don't like it being so long, so I am going to see which way is this going. I'm going to need to make this less. Let's do 1. Whoops, I'm sorry, I just created an extra object. I meant to delete, well no, this is good. Let me create this third object for you. Okay, now we have 3 objects. Oh, no, even better. Let me show you something else. Notice the solid ID. I don't like my second object, so I'm going to change this to 2. And when I hit apply, it's going to say, hey, this already exists. Do you want to overwrite it? Yes. So now the second object's gone, and I just created the new object in its place. So that's a convenient little tool. So now we created this object, and you're like, so why did we do this? Alright, this will actually allow us to make a hole. So the way you make a hole is now you go to edit, and we're going to edit our solids, and what we're going to do is we use a Boolean operation, And a Boolean operation either allows us to merge the two solids into one, subtract one solid from another, or find the difference between two solids. We're going to use this subtraction tool, and so here we have the target solid and the subtracting solid. Target solid is the one that we're going to want to keep, and the subtracting solid is the one that's going to tell us what to take away. So you see, as soon as I press that, the second solid turned into a hole. Now obviously this is a square hole, so we probably wouldn't want that. So now we can do our, again, edit, again, solid, and here we'll choose edge blend, when edge blend in SolidWorks, in Patran is the same as fillets or chamfers in SolidWorks. So let's select our fillet. Now I know that this object has a has a short side length of 1 inch. So I'm going to make this half. And when I click on one of these edges here, let me zoom in a little bit. It's going to turn that into a fillet. So now you can see how we could make a hole. Now for the other side, I'm actually going to use the chamfer. The offset on that is the direction along one of the walls, and the angle is the angle from that wall. So I'm going to make the offset 0.5. And now you see it does it like that. Now you can play around with this angle, and it's actually very cool. You could do some really cool things with it. But the only catch is you have to know which side it measures the angle from. And you won't usually know that until you try it. So let's see what happens in this one. Okay, so in this one, you notice because of the way it cut it, we can tell that this isn't in the center. So we know that the 0.5 that I said here for the offset means that if this was being measured along the face here, then the 0.5 would have been directly in the center. But since this isn't in the center, it means it must have measured the 0.5 along this wall. This can be a little inconvenient because it'll make it really hard for you to guess exactly what values these need to be in order for you to align this correctly so that it's in the center. But you can figure this out just using a simple calculator and doing the tangent of the two lengths you want to have. So in our case, since this is the angle that's being measured, because it's measuring relative to the face here, we'll do tangent of 0.5 over however long we want this side to be. I don't have a calculator with me at the moment, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to undo this and just set this back to 45. Okay, and let me apply it here. And okay, so that's cool. And now the third trick that I wanted to show you with these chamfers is you can actually combine chamfers and fillets. Okay, so we'll select a fillet and we can fillet this edge. Now you see you have a very interesting kind of different shape. And by repeating this, you're able to create these more elaborate kind of objects. Now I would warn you to be careful when picking the chamfers and make sure, when picking the fillets, and make sure that they're always going to be smaller than the faces you apply them to. So like for example, if I make this value very, very big, like 1 inch, when you create it, it's going to look okay, but there's a very high likelihood that it will create a self-intersecting part, which is extremely difficult to fix, and usually it's easier to just start the project over than try to fix that, at least in my experience, because I don't know how to fix it. So I would highly recommend being very careful with that. But you can see that you can make some pretty fancy things with it. So that's cool. Okay, so that's that. Alright, in my list of little quick things I wanted to show you is, well, we know the properties and applying them and stuff like that, so I'm just not going to worry about that. We know it also loads and stuff like that. The other thing I wanted to show real quickly is the meshing. So when you make a mesh, you want to create mesh seeds in order to tell Patran where to concentrate its efforts on. Mesh seeds are really cool because you can define the size of each the size of each element. So like for example, if you want a very fine mesh, you could make your mesh seeds finer by something like that. This would be very small mesh seeds, and so it'll make your mesh very fine. Or if you want something larger, you can make your mesh seeds bigger, and of course they will allow, these are very big mesh seeds. Yeah, it tries to fit them, but yeah, too big. Oops, I must have hit the back button too many times, so let's go back to here. Alright, so here we have mesh seeds. Let's not make this quite so big, let's make this one. So now, you see these are very big mesh seeds, or if I make this smaller, and I click on the same edge, it asks me, are you sure you want to overwrite it? Yes. Notice that there's a lot more of them now. And so these mesh seeds are going to tell you how big the mesh is going to be at that point. Okay, so the mesh seeds that I did here are all equally spaced. But for this project, it might be useful to have ones that are not equally spaced. So I'll show you this one-way bias thing. So this one-way bias, notice it gives you this little picture right here, and the picture has an arrow. This arrow corresponds to the arrows in your parts. So notice there's an arrow right there. So that means that the sizes of the mesh on the tail side of the arrow are going to be defined by L1, and the sizes of the mesh on the head side of the arrow are going to be defined by L2. So like for example, there are two ways sorry, just a second. There are two options here. You have the rate. You could either define how many elements you want and the ratio between L1 and L2, but more conveniently you could just directly define L1 and L2 and let Patran figure out how many actual mesh seeds are going to be based on these two numbers. So what this is saying is the size of L1 is going to be 0.1 and the size of L2 is going to be 0.2. So it means the meshes here on the tail side are going to be 0.1 in size, and the meshes on the head side are going to be 0.2 in size. Now this difference is pretty small, so I'm going to make this a much larger difference so you can see it in the model. But when I click it, you see the meshes here are really, really close together, and here they're very far apart. And the way you know which side is going to be smaller or larger is by following the arrow. This arrow is pointing to the right, and in the picture it's pointing to the right. But let's look at this one. See, this one is pointed upwards. So we can, I guess if you want to, you could kind of rotate your view so that it corresponds to your picture, or just, well, I can't really rotate it very well right now. Okay, yeah, there. See, it's pointing to the right, and here it's pointing to the right. But I mean, if you're sort of good at keeping yourself spatially oriented, you could probably just figure it out by looking at it. But anyways, so that's the one directional bias. This is useful, of course, for our project. And the other thing I want to show you is the two-way bias. Similar idea, except here the L1s are on the outside and L2s are in the center. So what this means is that you can create geometry that looks like this. See, it's got high concentrations of points on the outside and low concentrations of points on the inside. This is also pretty useful, especially for like things where you have like both of these things might have some forces on this side and on that side, but in the center it doesn't have any force. Okay, so now why are these mesh seeds important? The reason they're important is because they tell Patran where to put your mesh. Otherwise, it'll just sort of put it arbitrarily wherever it wants to put it. So you probably want to put these mesh seeds around the corners here and stuff like that. Okay, so now next thing I wanted to show you is go to right here under Create, then we'll go to Mesh, and now when you first select it, it offers to do it as a surface. Don't do that. We want to do it as a solid. So as a solid, we have these nice options. We have the TET, which is what we want to do, and then we have TET versus ISOMesh. We want to stick with TET mesh, and here we want to do TET 4 because TET 10 would create a lot more nodes. And we know that we have a limit of 5,000 nodes in our student edition, so we want to keep the nodes to a minimum. Okay, so now here in the input list, we can just type solid 1. Whoops. And the other cool thing is this global edge length. Now, for most things, automatic calculation will be fine, but if we exceed the number of nodes, we can easily use this by turning it off and changing this number on our own to try to coerce it into having less or more nodes as necessary. But okay, let me just hit apply and show you. Okay, alright, so now we see this thing, it turned purple and it looks kind of scary, but if we rotate our view, it'll actually clean up itself. Alright, so now let me zoom in and show you. You remember how we put very large sized nodes right here and very small nodes here. So we can see that from that, the mesh that it created had very large spaces in the center and smaller spaces in the corners. Similar applies here, where it was smaller spaces on the left and larger spaces on the right. Now here, we used a uniform mesh that had all of them be very close together. So you notice that all of these pieces are very small. Okay, so that's pretty simple. And if we don't like it, we can always change create to delete, and then mesh, solid, and solid 1, and boom, it's gone. Notice it turns black because it's deleted, but as soon as you rotate it, it goes away. Okay, and one other thing I wanted to show you. Let me just recreate this mesh. Notice that the node is at 1 right now. When I create the mesh, the node number increases to this number. Now, this number actually corresponds to one more than the number of nodes you have in your project. So so we know that our maximum is 5,000. So as long as this number is under 5,001, you're perfectly good. But suppose it was a large number like 5,000, you could easily change this number by disabling this automatic calculation and increasing this number. If you increase it, it usually, unless you have some very fancy, strange looking mesh seed layout, it will almost always make the mesh have less nodes. So you see it went down to 500 nodes because it forced these inner ones to be considerably larger. Okay, and I think that's all I want to show for the mesh. For the analysis, we want to do the analysis of the entire model. You can refer to specific details in my other video, but what I wanted to show here is that if you're ever having a problem with your analysis not working, simply go to Action, Delete. This is under Analysis still, and we want to delete a job, and delete your old job, and then go back to Analysis, and here just create a new one. So I just increment the name. You change the settings in here, of course, as I showed in the other video. But usually the settings are set correctly the first time, so you probably wouldn't even need to change them. Wait for it to finish, and now when you attach your XDB, make sure to select the new one that you just created. If it doesn't show up, you could also manually find it by hitting this Select Results file, and this will take you to the folder where your file is supposed to be, or if it was stored in some other folder, you could navigate to it easily. Okay, then you hit apply, it attaches itself. Now, to make sure that it did attach, you could open up this little panel down here at the bottom, and it should say begin attachment. Oh, actually, it should say end attachment. So on mine, it failed, but I'm not going to bother figuring out why. I'm pretty sure it's because I just sort of skipped a bunch of steps on my geometry and didn't do a very good job with it. I'm sorry, not my geometry, on my mesh. But if that happens, if it doesn't attach, like we see here, or wait, it actually looks like it's doing something. Oh, that was me just rotating the view, probably. Yeah. So if it didn't attach, one of the things you could try is go back to mesh, and if you weren't using the automatic calculation, you could try to turn it on, remesh it, go back to analysis, run this analysis one more time. Let's see. Oh, actually, no, it's fine. I don't know. I didn't read that error message. Oh yeah, you see yeah. Okay, so the reason my thing didn't work is because I never defined the properties for it. I deleted the other object, and this object didn't find properties. So it's not going to work, but I'm not going to bother with that. So anyways, after attaching the XDB, you'd go to Results, of course, fringe and deformation. Here, if you have more than one thing in this box, select the lowest one. Usually the lowest one is the latest one. As soon as you select one thing here, these two boxes would appear, and here you would want to select, for this project we want to do two things. We want to do displacements and the stresses. So when you're looking at the displacements, you're going to select displacement translation in this box here, and displacement translation in this box down here. If you're doing the stresses, however, you can select stress tensor in this box, and here you could either select forces or displacements. And now the reason I would personally suggest doing displacements in this bottom box here, the reason is this is the box that shows you what's happening as a picture here. So the top box gives you numbers that will be on the right side here, and the bottom box shows you a picture of what's happening. And the forces is, if you choose forces in this bottom box, it's not actually going to show you what really happened. All it's going to do is just show you some, like a graphical representation of high stress areas, which is frankly not very useful. It's much more useful to see the deformation. So that's why I recommend usually keeping the bottom box set to deformation translational. Okay, and I believe that's just about 20 minutes or maybe a little more. So I'm going to wrap up this video. Hope that was helpful. Oh, sorry, one quick other thing. In this view, when it actually deforms and you run your analysis, you'll notice that your model, your original model, is still visible, and it'll be in the way of your analysis. It'll be hard to see what your analysis looks like with the original model still here. So what you do is you switch it to wireframe. That's why wireframe, having this button here, is useful. And this wireframe is good, but it'll still sort of obscure your model, especially if you have a lot of nodes. So then what you do is you go to this third button right here. Select that, and here uncheck show on deformed. As soon as you uncheck that and you hit apply, what it would do is it'll just keep the outline of your part and not show you anything else. And so that's very useful for seeing how your part deformed, because now your part won't be in the way anymore. Okay, so that's that. That's this little long, sort of quick long video thing. Yeah, okay. Bye, I hope you enjoyed it. Good night.